The galaxy is old, its empires are powerful, and its wars are endless. Humanity stands. These are the Empyrean Chronicles.
6 hours in Maren's Crossing. Part 1. The City. The city of Maren's Crossing had been held by the Drath Vel for 62 days when Brigadier General Tomas Arriaga got his orders to take it back. He read the orders twice. Then he read the intelligence assessment that accompanied them, which described the Drath Vel defensive posture in the city, with the kind of clinical precision that meant the person writing it had never stood in a street that was being contested and tried to move through it. The Drath Vel had fortified every major intersection. They had turned the upper floors of the city's taller structures into firing positions with overlapping fields of fire. They had mined the approach routes from the south, which was the direction Arriaga's forces were coming from, and had pre-registered artillery on every open space large enough to concentrate troops. The city had a pre-war population of 280,000. Current estimates put the remaining civilian population at somewhere between 60 and 90,000. Those who had not evacuated before the Drath Vel took the city, or who had tried to leave afterward and had not made it. They were in the city now, in basements and shelters and the lower floors of buildings the Drath Vel had not yet occupied, and they were the reason Arriaga could not simply level the place from the air and call it done. He studied the city map for a long time. Maren's Crossing had been built in the way that cities built for people, rather than defense tended to be built. Streets that curved around geography, open squares, a river running through the center with bridges at regular intervals, a hospital district on the eastern side that had been designated a protected zone and which the Drath Vel had respected to their credit, in a way that told Arriaga their commander was not without some operational discipline. Operational discipline was not, in this case, a comfort. "Tell me about their commander," he said to his intelligence officer, Major Priya Sundaram. "Vel Commander Rethkas," Sundaram said. "Experienced. Fought in the corridor campaigns 3 years ago on Heroth. That's where the Drath Vel developed their urban consolidation doctrine. Fortify fast, integrate civilian infrastructure into the defensive structure where possible, make the cost of clearing the city higher than the attacker is willing to pay." "How high has he set the cost here?" "Our initial estimates put a full frontal assault at 40 to 60% casualties before the city is cleared. That's assuming we don't hold back for civilian protection, which we will, which makes it worse." Arriaga looked at the map. "He's expecting us to come from the south," he said. "It's the only viable approach. The western side is the river, too wide to cross under fire without bridging equipment we don't have in theater. The eastern side has the hospital district, and we can't approach through it. The north..." Sundaram pulled up the terrain model. "The northern approach goes through the industrial quarter. The Drath Vel have it heavily garrisoned. They assumed we'd come from the south because it's the path of least resistance." "Least resistance," Arriaga repeated. "Relatively speaking." "What's the industrial quarter's garrison strength?" Sundaram looked at him with the expression of someone who was starting to understand the direction of a question she had not been expecting. "Estimated 900 Drath Vel troops. It's their second largest concentration after the city center. And if we hit the industrial quarter from the north, from outside the city, not through it..." "The terrain north of the industrial quarter is open ground. We'd be crossing approximately 2 kilometers of flat approach under whatever fire the garrison can bring from the buildings. We'd take heavy casualties on the approach before we even reach the first structure." "Unless," Arriaga said, "the garrison is not looking north." Sundaram was quiet for a moment. "You want to fix their attention to the south first." "I want Rethkas watching the south. I want him certain we're coming through his mined approaches, into his prepared positions, exactly as he planned. I want him managing a southern assault when we come over the northern ridge." "A southern feint." "Not entirely a feint. The southern force has to be real enough to hold his attention, real enough to take some casualties. He said this without looking away from the map. I need volunteers for the southern element, people who understand what they're being asked to do. Sundaram looked at him steadily. I'll find them, she said. Part 2, South. Lieutenant Colonel Amara Diallo had been volunteered by herself before Sundaram had finished the sentence. She had been in urban combat twice before, once on Keswick, once in the Corridor campaigns, and she had the particular relationship with bad odds that people develop when they have survived bad odds enough times to stop finding them surprising. She assembled her element in the staging area south of the city and told them the truth. We are the distraction, she said. Our job is to convince Vel Commander Rethkas that the main assault is coming through the southern approaches. We will advance. We will take fire. We will hold the Drathvel's attention for as long as it takes General Arriaga's northern force to breach the industrial quarter and begin pushing toward the city center. At that point, the pressure on us will reduce as Rethkas has to respond to a threat he did not plan for, and we will continue the advance and link up with the northern element inside the city. She looked at the faces in front of her. 640 soldiers, assembled in the cool pre-dawn dark of a planet whose name none of them had known 8 months ago. I will not tell you this is safe, she said. You know it is not. I will tell you that what you are doing matters, and that the people on the other side of those buildings, the 60 to 90,000 civilians who could not get out, are the reason we are here, and the reason the cost is worth paying. Any questions? There were questions. She answered them all. Then she sent her people to their positions and waited for first light. The southern advance began at 0530, 40 minutes before the northern element was scheduled to breach the industrial quarter perimeter. The first 300 meters were the worst. The Drathvel had mined the approach roads as the intelligence had indicated, and Diallo's engineers were working under fire to clear them, moving in short bursts between cover while the soldiers behind them held position and returned fire against the upper floor firing positions that had opened up the moment the advance began. It was slow, costly, grinding work, the kind of fighting that measured progress in meters and casualties in increments that added up faster than anyone wanted to count. Diallo moved with her command element, staying close enough to the front to understand what was happening, and far enough back to maintain the overview she needed to manage it. Her radio operators relayed reports in both directions, the situation forward to her, her assessments back to Arriaga, who was watching the southern advance from his command position north of the city and using it to time the northern breach. At the 1 hour mark, Diallo's force had advanced 230 meters into the southern approach. They had taken 93 casualties, killed and wounded, the distinction brutal but necessary for combat effectiveness reporting. The Drathvel were responding exactly as planned, concentrating fire on the southern advance, reinforcing the positions that Diallo's force was pressing against, treating the south as the primary threat. They're pulling from the industrial quarter, Sundaram's voice came over the command channel. Signals intelligence is picking up Drathvel command traffic redirecting 2 companies from the northern garrison to reinforce the southern defensive line. Diallo processed this. 2 Drathvel companies moving from the industrial quarter to the south meant the northern approach was thinner. It also meant her people were taking fire from troops who had just been reinforced. Acknowledged, she said. Tell the general the south is holding. She kept moving forward. Part 3, North. Arriaga crossed the northern ridge at 0608 with 900 soldiers and the particular quiet of a force that has been ordered to move without the support of artillery or air cover, because artillery and air cover made noise and noise ended the surprise. The industrial quarter of Maren's Crossing was a dense collection of manufacturing buildings, warehouses, and processing facilities that had been built over 60 years of the city's growth and had the architectural logic of something that had evolved rather than been planned. There was no clean grid. There were covered approaches between structures, internal courtyards that could serve as rally points, elevated catwalks between buildings that a defending force could use, or that, if captured, could be turned against the defenders. The Drathvel garrison that remained, reduced by the two companies Reth Kas had pulled south, numbered somewhere between 500 and 600 troops. Still, a significant force. Still dug into prepared positions. But 500 troops defending a garrison designed for 900 was a different proposition, and the 2 hours that Diallo had spent holding Reth Kas's attention had given those 500 troops reasons to be watching the wrong direction. Arriaga's force hit the northern perimeter of the industrial quarter in 3 simultaneous elements, moving fast, and the first 60 seconds were determined by the collision between Surprise and the Drathvel's reaction speed. The Drathvel reacted faster than he had hoped and slower than he had feared. The garrison's northern perimeter posts had been reduced but not eliminated, and they engaged immediately. But engaging immediately and engaging effectively were different things when the force coming at you was not where you had been told to look and was not the size you had planned for. Arriaga's center element punched through the northern perimeter in 4 minutes. His left and right flanking elements took longer. The left ran into a Drathvel position that had not been thinned by the redistribution south. A full company dug into a warehouse complex that stopped the flank element cold for 11 minutes before a flanking movement around the warehouse's eastern face, led by Captain Brennan Okiki with 2 platoons and a great deal of personal initiative, opened a gap that the element poured through. 11 minutes was not the plan. The plan had not allocated 11 minutes for the left flank. Arriaga adjusted. He pushed his center element deeper into the industrial quarter rather than waiting for the flanks to close up, accepting the risk of an exposed center in exchange for speed and the pressure that speed put on the Drathvel commander, who was now receiving reports of a breach in the north while managing a southern assault he had thought was the main effort. Reth Kas, to his credit, understood what was happening within minutes of the northern breach reports reaching him. The command traffic Sundaram was monitoring shifted suddenly. Not panic, not disorder, but the rapid reprioritization of a commander who had been outmaneuvered and knew it and was already thinking about how to limit the damage. He began pulling forces from the southern line. He began repositioning his city center reserves toward the industrial quarter. He began, in short, responding to the situation that existed rather than the situation he had planned for, which meant the pressure on Diallo's southern element dropped. Diallo noticed it immediately. Part 4. The river. "They're pulling back from the southern line," Diallo said into the command channel. The fire coming from the upper floor positions ahead of her had reduced, not stopped, not abandoned, but measurably thinner, the gaps between incoming fire wider. "We're advancing." "Push hard," Arriaga said. "I need you in the city center before Reth Kas can consolidate his reserves there." Diallo pushed hard. Her 640 soldiers, 512 now, accounting for the casualties of the past 2 hours, came off the defended approaches and into the outer streets of the southern city with a momentum that had been building through 2 hours of grinding advance and released all at once into something closer to pursuit. Not that the Drathvel were routing. They were not. They were falling back in order, covering each other, using the city's street structure to slow the advance and make Diallo's soldiers pay for every block. But falling back in order under pressure was not the same as holding, and Diallo's people had spent 2 hours being shot at while holding position and were now moving, which was a different thing entirely for the people doing it. She pushed them. She pushed them through the outer residential streets, through the commercial district with its shuttered storefronts and its barricaded alleyways, toward the river at the city's center. The bridges were the objective. 3 crossing points that, if held, would link the southern force with the northern force, now pushing through the industrial quarter from the other side, and complete the encirclement of whatever Drathvel forces remained in the city center. The Drathvel understood the bridges mattered. Rethkos had placed a full battalion at the river line, troops who had not been redistributed to the south or the industrial quarter, troops who had been positioned specifically to hold the crossing points regardless of what happened elsewhere in the city. They were fresh, well-positioned, and waiting. Diallo reached the southern bank of the river at 8:14 and assessed the bridge positions through the optics of a woman who had been fighting for 2 hours and 40 minutes and was not inclined toward optimism. 3 bridges. 3 strongly held positions, and no way across the river that did not involve going over one of them. She called Arriaga. "The river line is solid," she said. "Full battalion, prepared positions, covering all 3 bridges. I can push on the bridges, but it's going to cost me." "How long to force a crossing?" "Against what's there. An hour minimum. Maybe 90 minutes. More casualties than I want to count right now." A pause. Then Arriaga's voice, doing something she had heard it do before. Not quite a smile, but the quality of a man who has just seen something he was waiting to see. "Hold the south bank. Don't assault the bridges yet. Give me 20 minutes. "What happens in 20 minutes? "The northern element reaches the river." Diallo looked at her map. The industrial quarter was on the north side of the river. If Arriaga's northern force reached the riverbank from their side, "You're going to hit the bridge positions from both banks simultaneously," she said. "The Drathvel battalion holding those bridges," Arriaga said, "is positioned to defend against a crossing from the south. They are not positioned for a force on their own side of the river." 20 minutes, she said. 20 minutes. She held the south bank and waited, and watched the clock, and did not look at the casualty reports that were still coming in from her forward elements. The northern element reached the riverbank at 0833. Not 20 minutes. 24. Because the push through the industrial quarter had been faster in some places and slower in others, and Arriaga had been driving his people hard through the streets of a contested city with every complication that entailed. 24 minutes. Close enough. The simultaneous assault on the bridge positions began at 0834. From the south, Diallo's force hit all 3 bridges at once, not to cross, not yet, but to pin the Drathvel battalion's attention to the water, to make the defenders on each bridge manage the threat in front of them rather than the threat that was now on their own bank, behind them, coming through the industrial quarter streets at the backs of positions that had been designed to look south. The Drathvel battalion commander understood what was happening within minutes. The command traffic shifted, urgent, compressed, the particular quality of a commander managing a situation that had gone from controlled to untenable in the space of a radio report. He began rotating his positions, pulling troops from the bridge faces to cover the northern approach, trying to establish a perimeter that could hold against pressure from 2 directions simultaneously. It could not. A battalion sized to hold 3 bridge crossings against a force from 1 direction could not hold 3 bridge crossings against forces from 2 directions. The mathematics did not allow it. Rethkos had positioned his reserve battalion to stop 1 threat. He was facing 3. The first bridge fell at 0849. Not stormed. The Drathvel position on its southern end collapsed when the troops holding it were hit from the north by Arriaga's flanking element. At the same moment, Diallo's soldiers pushed from the south, and the troops in the middle ran the calculation correctly and moved to the second bridge rather than die in place. The second bridge held for another 11 minutes before the same logic applied. The third held longest. The Drathvel commander concentrated what remained of the battalion there, a last coherent defensive position in the city's center, and held it with the kind of stubborn discipline that Arriaga respected and could not afford to respect for long. He did not storm it. He surrounded it. Surrounded, out of contact with their command structure, with no relief coming and no route out, the Drathvel battalion at the third bridge made the decision that military discipline and basic arithmetic combined to make inevitable. At 0931, their senior officer contacted Arriaga's forward command post and requested terms. Arriaga gave them terms, reasonable terms, The Drathvel had fought professionally and had not, to his knowledge and Sundaram's monitoring, harmed civilians in the conduct of their defense. He respected that. He told them so. The surrender was orderly. Part 5. What comes after? Vel commander Rethkos did not surrender. He withdrew with what remained of his command, approximately 400 troops, those who had not been encircled or captured in the industrial quarter fighting, through the eastern edge of the city and into the open terrain beyond, where he established a defensive position and waited for whatever came next. He was a practical commander. He had been outmaneuvered, and he knew it. He was not going to throw away 400 soldiers in a fight he had already lost. Arriaga sent a reconnaissance element to monitor the withdrawal and did not pursue. His people had been fighting for 6 hours. They had what they had come for. The clearing of Maren's crossing took another 3 days. The careful work of moving through a contested city to find and neutralize the positions that had not surrendered. The slower work of establishing that civilian shelters were safe to open. The slower work still of beginning to understand what 62 days of occupation had meant for the people who had lived through it. Arriaga was present for all of it. He had learned in the years of this war that the taking of a place and the accounting for what the taking cost were not separate operations. They were the same operation at different speeds. On the 4th day, he walked across the first bridge, the one that had fallen at 0849, the one where the fighting had been close enough that there were marks on the bridge's railing from weapons fire, the one where 3 of his soldiers and an unknown number of Drathvel troops had died in the minutes before the position collapsed. He walked across it in the early morning, before his staff was fully active, before the day's work of reconstruction and assessment had begun. The river beneath was wide and slow, reflecting the sky. The city around him was quiet in the way that cities are quiet after something has happened to them. Not peaceful, not quite, but still. A child appeared at the far end of the bridge. Small, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, wearing clothes that had been worn for too many days in a row, and carrying something that turned out, when Arriaga got closer, to be a stuffed animal of some kind, a Vareth form actually, one of the pre-war children's toys that had been common enough before the fighting started. The child looked at him with the particular directness of children who have spent too long in basements and are no longer surprised by soldiers. Arriaga stopped. He did not know what to say. He was a general. He was good at orders, at assessments, at the precise language of military operations. He was not, at this moment, sure what language this required. The child solved the problem for him. "Is it over?" the child asked. Arriaga thought about this. The city was taken. The Drathvel had withdrawn. The bridge was passable. People were coming out of shelters. "This part," he said. "Yes, this part is over." The child looked at him for a moment longer, then nodded with the gravity of someone filing important information, and walked past him across the bridge and into the southern part of the city. Arriaga watched the child go. Then he turned and looked back at the city he had taken, at the buildings with their damage and their marks and their 60 to 90,000 people beginning to emerge into the daylight, and he thought about Diallo's 512 and Okeki's flanking move at the warehouse and the Drathvel battalion commander who had asked for terms and been given them, and the child with the stuffed animal, and all the things that the ground of a city remembers long after the soldiers have gone. He stood on the bridge for a while longer. Then he went back to work.
If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of humanity rising among the stars, please like, comment, and subscribe. New stories are released regularly here on Empyrean Chronicles.